If you walk down these aisles of books, all printed on the same uncoated white paper and pressed together and glued at the spine, they are tangibly pretty much made of the same stuff. Of course, the beauty and the art in their creation pertains to the abstraction of the printed word and the story between the cover. Step beyond that materialism for a second and think, what allows for this? What permits us access to the imaginary that is essentially created by these splotches of ink on paper? Beyond the mere idea of what to write about, the answer hinges on two important aspects of language: linguistic technique and style. On this episode of Punkwrite, stick around to find out what makes these two so important in terms of writing fiction. Don't go anywhere. I think anyone who's seriously investigated the craft of writing has come across this book, Strunk and White, The Elements of Style. This tiny little book is excellent in terms of refining your sense of the English language, as it's full of a myriad of rules and constructions and substitutions that are necessary for a basic understanding of the syntax and grammar of the English language. To write well in any genre, fiction, nonfiction, it's absolutely essential to have a basic understanding and mastery of how the language works. Anyone who tells you differently is probably not a great writer. I think it's a bit erroneously named, however, because in this book, the whole idea of technique and style is kind of folded back into itself as if it's one and the same. But I want to be very clear. Technique and style are very different. So let's start with a working definition when we talk about technique, because technique refers specifically to the structure, the syntax, and the grammatical rules that define the use of language. Basically, it allows us to understand the symbolic representation of the letters and the words so that it makes sense in terms of our agreement of how that language works. That's why it's suggested that you should write in one language and stick to one language. Even the bilingual people that I know don't have a complete mastery of both languages, and those that actually do, I think, are extremely rare cases. To write and express with the acuity of the language is something that is very rare. There are some authors that try to do that. You have authors like Murakami, mixes a little bit of Japanese structure in his English, and even authors like Hemingway have done the same. This example is from Ernest Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls. It reads, "You have that many years?" Robert Jordan asked. 68 in the month of July. The first construction is a clear translation from Spanish. We would say, "You're that old." 68 in the month of July is also a strange grammatical correction because we would not use the categorical noun after month to define July. The dialogue is perhaps meant to emulate the Spanish language, but this is only going to be effective if the reader understands both languages. If not, it just seems a little bit off. I think Hemingway gets away with it here because this is dialogue, so it gives the impression of what the characters are like. But using these structures in a narrative just sounds a little bit strange in terms of English syntax and grammar. By the way, if you're new to the channel or you're enjoying the content, feel free to like the video, subscribe, or leave a comment below. It all helps out. And welcome to Punkwrite. For me, the beauty of language is in the style of its expression. How an author arranges words or uses intonations or stresses certain aspects of the ideas are all related to the way that the author sees the world. It's also a way of defining the reading experience and the way that they want the reader to interpret and interact with the work that they've defined. Style is the artistic expression of how grammar and syntax is used to relate an idea or a concept or a story. In this, we're able to see personality and individuality, all of it which affects the way the individuals write. You can take a single mundane subject and you can have 10 different authors sit next to it, and what you're going to get as a result in terms of their interpretation is going to be totally unique and different. This dichotomy of technique and style is not unique to writing, however. It is a fundamental aspect to every human activity that we do. Now, there's a whole philosophical discussion here that we can apply to any activity. In sport, there are rules of physics that dictate the efficiency of hitting or launching a projectile, but how the individual approaches that execution is unique, special, and individual. In music, there is the technique of knowing musical scales and gaining dexterity to hit the right notes. But how those notes are struck and combined defines different styles of the musician. In architecture, the technique of building involves knowing the materials and strengths and weaknesses, but how it all comes together defines the style and vision of the designer. I think you get my point. And writing is no different. When we're talking about the qualities of writing, we're looking at tone, which is established by the selection of words and the arrangement of words in a sentence. We're also looking at pacing in terms of how the story moves along according to sentence structures and size and length, or simply word choice, using vocabulary that establishes a specific relationship with the reader. Among other qualities, we can talk about this holistically as the writer's voice. As a writer, I can say that this is going to come mostly from writing a lot and writing freely. And the rules of a language provide the building blocks of your story. But how those rules are bent and manipulated really define the originality of the author and how that language is used by the author to express something wholly unique. And this brings us to the next part of the video. Because what about breaking the rules? What about grammatical incorrectness? Because we all know that this is an intricate part of fiction writing that allows for a skilled writer to effectively forget the rules of grammar and syntax so they can write towards something that is wholly individualistic and fully expressive of what they want to say. You will likely see this rule breaking in the genre of literature more than any other genre. And this is because of the expectations that the other genres may bring. In nonfiction, there's a certain academic quality, so you don't want to deviate too much from that. In young adult or middle age, those rule breakings might be a little bit more sophisticated than that audience demands. So I've selected a few salient examples that I think illustrate the points that I want to make. Let's take a look. The first example we're going back to Ernest Hemingway. And one of the things that made him quite notable in terms of his style and voice is the preference of shorter sentences and the elimination of commas, which are two aspects of his work that really mark his style. This was done purposely for the effect of clarity and some sort of reader effect that he wanted to achieve. In this example, technically speaking, there should be a comma after the first prepositional phrase, and it's a compound sentence. Hemingway, however, chooses to eliminate these for fluidity and speed of reading. This becomes indicative of his work, which in part helps him earn a Nobel Prize. The second example we see is from the author J.M. Coetzee from the book Waiting for the Barbarians. He is a South African author who has also won a Nobel Prize in literature. In both of the cases that you see, the accepted syntax would be the use of a semicolon as opposed to a comma because you're looking at two independent clauses. The omission is purposeful, and he does this consistently through his work. When appreciating literature, ask yourself, what effect does this have on the feeling and the flow of the idea that the author is trying to express? And you get a better sense of this author's style in that respect. Lastly, let's take a look at Jose Saramago's dialogue in the book Blindness. And he is notorious for his omission of quotation marks, commas, and in particular, how he transitions from one character to the next. If you don't pay attention, you can easily get lost, but if you step back and read it with a certain fluidity, you'll find a certain brilliance in the way that he's manifested this fluidity of language by manipulating those grammatical points. Breaking the rules is what makes these writers Nobel laureates. Their use of language has pushed the boundary of syntax, it's pushed the boundary of meaning, and that is why we appreciate them for who they are. As you go through your own writing process, I encourage you to take a look at different authors' styles to see what makes them unique. And you can even incorporate them into your own writing to develop your own technique and style as well. In my own writing, I've actually started to eliminate subordinate conjunctions or extend the use of appositives or even use fragments here or there for emphasis and clarity. All of that helps to define how I want to express myself in the written form. You can do the same. That's it for today on Punk Write. And if you like the content, remember, feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Until then, you know what to do. You just keep on writing. Punk Write!